Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Sorry for the delay. This morning topic is about environmental and legal compliance update on offshore renewable energy projects. So we'll have three speakers with us today. The first speaker will be Kathy Bradshaw. Kathy is a freshwater and marine biologist at RSK, and she will focus on environmental sustainability and the process of environmental impact assessments. We will have then Charlotte O'Kelly from TechWorks Marine, and where she will present the importance of collecting robust marine data on sites. And then we will finish with our last speaker, who is Xavier Marchand from a law firm, Franklin law firm, and will present the latest updates on legal compliance related to offshore renewable energy projects. As you can see, this presentation is in English. We also have a presentation in French that we will send to every attendee after the webinar. And also for each, at the beginning of each presentation, you have the titles translated in French. Also, if you have questions, because there will be a question and answer session after each presentation, you can also ask your question in French. If you feel you can't ask your question in English. Before we start, we have a few housekeepers notes. So just as a reminder, everyone's microphones are automatically on mute throughout the webinar. Again, during the presentation, you can ask your question, and there will be a Q&A session after each presentation for 5 minutes. And shortly after the webinar, we will send you a link to a short survey, so you can take a few minutes to provide feedback so we can improve on future webinars. Okay, so I will introduce our first speaker, Kathy Bradshaw. Kathy is a chartered marine and freshwater biologist. She has experience that includes project direction, project management, and support of environmental impact assessments, cable studies, and post-consent compliance for a range of projects in the energy sector. She has a background of leading and facilitating groups, organizations, and key stakeholders to navigate the complexity that surrounds the barriers to consent and licensing in energy projects. So Kathy, are you on? Can you join us now?
Yes, hopefully you can hear me and see me.
Sure. Yes, I can hear you. So I will let you begin, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'll turn my camera off now, and we'll move on to the next slide, please, Stephanie. Thank you all. Excellent. So I have 20 minutes and then 5 minutes for questions, and I have more slides than I can talk through, so we'll provide those on the slide pack for you. So at the end of this question, I'm hoping that people will be clearer on the environmental aspects of offshore wind and some of the new things that we have to consider when we carry out projects, such as natural capital assessments and biodiversity net gain, which are quite new concepts in the last few years. And also have an understanding of some of the lender performance requirements, like the IFC standards, for example, and looking at trends in decarbonisation as well. So if we could move on to the next slide. Thank you. I'm guessing that many people on the call will have already an environmental background and will already know a lot about RSK. And as such, I'm preaching to the converted. But we do stress that we are very committed to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and helping our clients both in the renewables industry, but also the more traditional oil and gas industries as we move towards sustainability. Next slide, please. There's lots of drivers for change. Most of you only have to switch on the news on the television and you'll see some climate related piece on the news. But it's not just about climate change and global warming. It's also the impact that has on biodiversity as species come to terms and have to adapt to the changes in the climate. So it's climate and biodiversity very much together, hand in hand. Some of the sort of country specifications are there on the right-hand side, and the way that companies and countries have responded to the climate change agenda through the Paris Agreement and the COPs, which we've recently just had COP27. There's obviously a move away from petrol and diesel cars, and the policies of the major lenders and banks, for example, the EBRD, which now will not fund hydrocarbon projects. And then the slide at the bottom there is just an example of energy transition policies being developed, including by the big oil and gas majors and other companies. Okay, next slide, please. So this is just a reminder of the IFC environmental and social performance standards, which also relate to the UN Sustainable Development Goals for environmental and social aspects. And these define the IFC clients' responsibilities for managing environmental and social risk. So biodiversity, resource efficiency, risk management are the key ones for the environment, with cultural heritage also included. Labour, community, land resettlement, indigenous people are the social performance standards in addition. Okay, next slide, please. So as you're no doubt aware, France strongly supported the UN's adoption in September 2015 of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And in the diagram there are the 17 Sustainable Development Goals for the world to eradicate extreme poverty, combat inequalities, and protect the planet. All of them are interlinked. And as a marine biologist, I'm particularly interested in number 14, which is life below water. Okay, next one, please. So how does this impact projects and project construction? Well, all of this has to be taken into consideration when carrying out risk management. When you need to consider the impact you're going to have on biodiversity and the way you efficiently use resources. If you could just press the click button, that's it, thank you. So obviously, if we don't have an environment, we don't have an economy. And what we will do is we will spend all our gross domestic product on dealing with the issues that have resulted from climate change, such as rising sea level, flood defences, moving people away from where they're living in low-lying areas. So all of this is intrinsically linked, and we can't think that as an environment it's the nice to have thing that will fall by the wayside as we have commercial constraint through the can't think of the word, but if the economy isn't doing well, we can't afford to forget about the environment and environmental regulations, because if we don't have that environment, then we haven't got a suitable place to live and we have no economy, is what I'm trying to say. Okay, next slide, please. So we now have an increased understanding of natural capital and what that actually means. So it's a term used to describe the Earth's stock and natural assets, which include all living things and the world that we live in. So we get, if you like, a range of services from the environment, which we call the ecosystem services, which make all human life possible. And we have to take a natural capital approach to the policy and decisions that we make, and consider the value of the natural environment to people and the economy. So if you could just press the return, this little figure here just lists the types of things I'm talking about. So there's provisioning services such as food, supporting services such as nutrient cycling, genetic diversity, primary production, cultural services such as education, the spiritual aspects, the aesthetics of the environment, well-being, and the way we use the environment for recreation, and then regulating services such as carbon management and climate regulation. Okay, next slide, please. So putting this all together, a natural capital approach supports decision-making and enables funding and implementation. So this diagram here looks at all aspects of this, from carbon accounting, habitat regulation and creation, river restoration, environmental studies, how the landscape impacts this, how catchments play a part, carbon accounting, etc. All right, next slide, please. This is just an example of biodiversity net gain. So I'm not sure if it'd be interesting to find out how many of you are working in biodiversity net gain, but a lot of the energy companies are leading the way in this now. And basically, it's an approach which, when you're considering development and land management, the aim is to leave the natural environment in a measurably better state than it was beforehand, and it is becoming mandatory. So that's being introduced now in the UK through the government. And as I say, some of the leading developers are taking a key role with this. It's well established for terrestrial, and it's becoming more known about for marine. And there has been a recent consultation paper on the principles of marine net gain, which consider both the habitat and the species issues at stake, and should result in greater biodiversity after construction. And it does require a robust baseline, which fits in well with what Charlotte is going to talk about later in the call. So the main 3 steps for assessing biodiversity net gain, in the figure at the bottom there on the left-hand side, is step 1, using an assessment framework to measure the project's impacts and understand residual losses. Step 2, assessing the assessment framework and measuring the benefits of proposed interventions. And step 3, demonstrating that the value of the interventions achieved the mandated level or gain over and above any residual loss. And that fits well in with the requirements of the habitat regulations from the Habitats Directive, which we all deliver as part of our work. Okay, next slide, please. So decarbonisation, again, I don't know if people are working in this at the moment, but it's basically literally reducing carbon on a project by project basis. And it's really the conversion to an economic system that sustainably reduces and compensates the emissions of carbon dioxide with a view to creating a carbon-free global economy. So if you could press return. So this is a carbon heat map, and you can work out where the sources of carbon are in your project, whether it's terrestrial or marine. And if you could click the return. Thank you. So this is a report that came out in 2020, which basically looks at the effect on the operations and maintenance of offshore wind industry, and how the carbon that's produced from that might be mitigated and reduced. So if we could go on to the next slide, please. So many of you will know these facts and figures, so I haven't used this presentation to go over the story so far. But the UK offshore wind industry has obviously seen very rapid growth in the past 10 years, with more than 10 gigawatts now installed in UK waters, with a target of 50 gigawatts by 2030. And if we want to be achieving net zero by 2050, which is the UK's ambition, then that would require 100 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2050. And the European Union has set a 300 gigawatt target for 2050. So currently 79% of all European offshore wind, that's the EU 27 plus UK, is located in the North Sea, and the region will remain one of the world's largest economic geographies for the foreseeable future. And the two diagrams there just show where the installed and planned capacity is in which waters. So with the operations and maintenance, most of the supply vessels currently use marine gas oil, and it's estimated that they're currently responsible, this is just servicing the offshore wind sector, are estimated to emit 284 kilotons of carbon dioxide per year. And there's ways of reducing this through the adoption of clean maritime innovations. So if anyone is interested in that, if you can click return, move on to the next slide, then you can follow that report that I put the link in for. So this I'm not going to dwell on, but these are the stages of an ESHA, and we start off with screening and scoping, moving on into the ESHA, then environmental management plans, which basically tell the developers what they should be doing to manage those risks, and then the monitoring and auditing that needs to be done to show that that's being done, and then the operational management systems, which are the ongoing requirement, and including various audits, including often lender audits. Okay, next slide, please. So this is, again, I'm not going to dwell on this. This is just an example of from a scoping report I wrote recently for one of our sites, floating offshore wind sites in Ireland. And these just show the sorts of equipment installations you might have. And then on the right hand side, we generally divide it up into three areas: the physical environment, biodiversity, which is both looking at the marine and the terrestrial, which are the elements in green, and then population and human health, which you've got all the other things, like for the marine environment, aviation, commercial fisheries, port shipping and navigation, noise, including underwater noise, particular interest. Okay, next slide, please. Again, I'm not going to dwell on this, but this just shows the stages. Again, you often start with the constraints mapping, where you're looking at all the environmental sensitivities. So this is something we do for our clients routinely. And then the licensing to do with ground investigation work, site investigation work, the surveys themselves, the EIA process and licensing that goes with that, and then supporting developers through construction and thereafter. Okay, next slide, please. All right, if you can press, yeah, thank you. So, yeah, just stop, thank you. So this slide, it's really just to say, you know, the benefit that we do get from the marine environment. I'm sure all of you will enjoy going to the seaside, and most of the marine biologists amongst us have become marine biologists probably because we have fond memories of being on holiday by the seaside. But we don't look after the marine environment just because it looks pretty, or because the plants and animals there have value, both in carbon sequestration in the terms of mangroves and seagrasses, but also, you know, because of the species there. There's a lot to learn from them. Dolphins, there's, you know, most intelligent mammals after ourselves. Habitats, so that's a picture of the Great Barrier Reef taken in April on an eco snorkeling tour I was doing. Not because we understand that we have to be sustainable, or because worthy people on the television tell us that we have to. So if you can press return again. And not even just because we understand that there is an actual worth in doing so. You know, there's an impact, a much wider impact, if we don't look after the marine environment. So next slide, please. So if we don't do this, what's going to happen? If you can click return. So this is an example where in 1991, 240 million gallons of oil were believed to have been discharged into the Persian Gulf, killing hundreds of fish and marine mammals. And whether it by accident or design, it's obviously not good news. There's been various reports looking at how much oil ends up in the marine environment. Okay, the second one, please, if you could. Yeah. So this is a picture of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. It's over 600,000 miles across, which is twice the size of France. The detritus already weighs about 87,000 tons and is growing by the day. So it includes bottles, bags, fishing nets, and all come together in this gyratory system in the Pacific. And when you think of plastics, if you are developing on site upriver, a lot of this waste comes down the rivers and is wind blown off site construction sites. So it's estimated to be about 1.8 trillion pieces of trash, and has been modelled to see how far it's growing and what can be done to it. A lot of it sinks to the bottom, so that's just the surface really. And obviously, you know, it just shows what happens if we don't get our handle on marine plastics. A lot of this is also around about a study done in 2018 estimated that about 50% of this was fishing nets. Okay, let's move on. Next one. Okay, so this is just an example of a dead whale washed up, reported on the news a few years back in the Philippines. An autopsy showed that it had 40 kilograms of plastic in its stomach. Okay, the next one. So this is a report from May this year, estimating that 91% of the Great Barrier Reef that's been surveyed has been affected by bleaching caused by global warming. So this is just a snapshot. There was a report published by the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority saying that the above average water temperatures in late summer had caused the coral bleaching throughout 2,300 kilometres of the reef system, especially between Cape Tribulation and the Whitsundays. So the Australian Marine Conservation Society said it's devastating news, and there's over 9,000 species that depend on that very special environment. Okay, the next one. So an insider report last year suggested in the best case scenario, sea levels could rise by 10 feet in the next 200 or so years. But if global temperatures rise by 3 degrees, floods could overtake many national landmarks. And, you know, worst case scenario, 800 million people could be vulnerable to sea level rise. And so these are just examples of some of the world's landmarks being submerged in water. And even with the best case scenario, the 1.5 degrees, that could still lead to a 10-foot sea level rise. And when you work out what that actually means in real terms, it's not good news. And it could mean that 510 million people, even in that scenario, could be vulnerable to sea level change. That example there is the Plaza de España in Seville, where even in the good cases scenario, 4% of the population could be vulnerable to flooding, or 8% if it went up to 3 degrees, which doesn't sound that bad, but if you think of Jakarta's population who are vulnerable to flooding, that rises to 82% at 3 degree rise. Okay, if you could click return, please. So we can all do something about this. This is a picture taken from COP26 in Glasgow last year with some of our RSK staff who are all presenting on different aspects of climate change. And the next one. And everyone here today. The next one. So not just the presenters, but the picture on the left there was some of the people from IPLOCA, the International Pipeline Association, who had a sustainability workshop in Barcelona last month, which some of us went along to. Next slide, please. So I'm coming close to my time, so I won't go into these in a lot of detail. But these are 3 examples of projects that we've worked on. We can go for the next slide, please. Rampion, just a large offshore wind farm where we worked on both the marine and onshore elements. and led the EIA and licensing process. Next slide, please. This is a very interesting project. It's the world's first offshore wind hydrogen project in Aberdeen, where Vattenfall are looking to put hydrogen electrolysis equipment onto one of their turbines to help generate hydrogen and pipe it to the shore. There is one other oil and gas related electrolysis hydrogen system that I'm also aware of, and hydrogen and ammonia are very interesting in terms of helping us to reach net zero. Next slide, please. And this is another example of a floating offshore wind farm in France, or demonstrator rather. And this one just gives an example of the way we're all going, because floating offshore wind is more suited to deeper waters. So the UK has very shallow shelves and has been able to develop through jackets and monopiles. But a lot of the world has much deeper waters around the coast, like Japan, for example, and France. And so floating offshore wind is going to be very important in the rollout of offshore wind. I think that's me. I think my last slide just shows how we're going to do this. And it's basically by working together and taking a joined up approach to climate change and biodiversity as we roll out our projects over the coming years. So thank you for your time. I will pass back to Katie, I think, and Stephanie.
Yeah, thank you, Katie. We have one question here. What do wind and renewable resources in Southern Europe look like since you gave data for the North Sea?
So Southern Europe, I'm assuming that you're talking about France in particular.
Well, it's not precisely said like that, but I guess in the Mediterranean, maybe coast.
Yep. So all of the countries with a coastline in mainland Europe are involved or getting increasingly involved in offshore wind. So you'll have seen the map I put up earlier. I don't know if you can go back to that one. I think it was just find it. I think it was, yeah, I don't know what slide number was on your pack, but it was sort of halfway through my presentation. But there is a slide there which has a map of the Baltic and the North Sea in particular. But there's more planned for France that I'm sure people on the call will be aware of. So there are studies going on or due to start quite soon in the southern Atlantic and Mediterranean, which will look at marine mammals and bird populations with a view to those areas being developed for offshore wind. And France has obviously got a demonstration site at the moment, which I had on one of my previous slides. So there's a lot of exciting opportunities and a lot going on in the Celtic Sea as well, as people might be aware. But we can provide further information on that after the call today, if people would like more information.
We also have another Q&A session at the end of everyone's presentation. Well, thank you again, Kathy. Now, if Charlotte is available, we would start with her presentation. So Charlotte is specialized in marine data collection and has worked on offshore wind development projects since 2019. She has more than 20 years expertise in oceanography, and her mission is to facilitate customers' development projects and operations at sea by supplying the marine data that they need. And over the course of the last 4 to 5 years, the company, so TechWorks Marine, has undertaken measurements campaigns for companies such as EDF and ENGIE. So Charlotte, if you're with us,
Yep.
I will let you present your PowerPoint.
Perfect. So
It's yours.
perfect. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes, we hear you.
Perfect. Thanks for the opportunity to present. We're doing it in English and not in French, but we have the French slide deck as well as the English one, so we can send those after the presentation. So next slide. By way of brief introduction, so my name is Charlotte Kelly. I'm the founder and managing director of TechWorks Marine. We are a marine data company, and we focus on providing our clients with robust, reliable and secure marine data. So talking directly after Kathy's actually makes sense in terms of telling the story, because we provide data to a number of industries, and we provide part of the data that Kathy was talking about in her presentation. So by way of a brief overview of our history, we are 20 years old. We started off looking at aquaculture, but we have been working in marine renewables since 2009, notably in tidal energy and in wave energy. So we were involved with a lot of the early tidal energy in France, the Channel Islands, Scotland, Ireland and Northern Ireland. And we've also been involved with wave energy developments, providing them with resource data. So measuring the physical conditions of the sites they're looking to exploit with their energy devices. Then we've been working with the European Space Agency, so using spatial data to provide our clients with a value-added service linked around the monitoring from the marine environment. And have also worked traditionally in ports and harbours and in water. So most, I guess, uses of the coastal environment. In all cases, we supply very similar products in terms of we supply data on the physics and the biology of the ocean, or the coastal environment where that user is going to be working. And then we also, because we put out real-time data boards at sea, and I'll go into them in a bit of detail in a minute, we also sell data board networks to governments or to public agencies, and we have networks from Scandinavia down to the Med via Ireland. Next slide, please. On a fait les deux diapos, d'accord. So what do we do? Well, we sell marine data as a service. Again, as Kathy was saying, to develop projects and to develop the early stage projects, you need information to be able to understand how much money you're going to make on site in terms of wind resource, but also how to design your wind farm so that it can survive the specific site conditions. And that's where we come in. So we really are very upfront in the project in terms of timelines. So we would be one of the first surveys that happens, along with the marine mammals and the seabirds and all the benthic surveys. We put out data buoys, such as you can see there, and I'll describe them a bit more in a few minutes. And both real time and also in self-logging mode. And we provide that data to our clients over a 12 or a 24-month period, so they can get a good baseline assessment of the sites they're looking to develop. We provide them with that data if they go for a real-time option through our data portal called CoastEye, where they can then see their data in real time. They can see that the buoy assets are not moving at sea, and they get the data quality controlled on the fly. And we also can link that in with value-added data. So what I call value-added data is spatial data. So numerical models such as hydrodynamic models or wave models, and also Earth observation, so satellite data about sea surface roughness, about water quality, about currents, and therefore waves. Next one. Just to give you a tiny bit of background on who we are. So we are 20 years old. We're based in Dublin in Ireland, but we do work all over Europe and even further afield, primarily in the coastal zone. So coastal zone for me is, 50 kilometers off the coast, but we can go further offshore, and some of the offshore sites are further off, mostly in the ScotWind sites at the moment, for example, in Scotland. And our team is fully insured to carry out this type of survey and this type of equipment. We do make two things in TechWorks, the data logger, which is the photo on the bottom left-hand side of your slide. We actually make our own data loggers, so our team has a very intimate understanding of all the technology we use in the full process chain, which makes it a lot easier and also a lot more, for us, a lot safer solution to use than integrating lots of different systems off the shelf and then having to rely on third parties as and when issues happen. The buoys on the right-hand side, I'll come back to them in a second. Next slide, please. So for offshore wind, but also for coastal engineering, we're fully ISO compliant in terms of HSQE, and we're currently looking at ISO 27001 specifically around data, because our core aim is marine data as a service. Next one. So in offshore wind, over the last 20 years, we've been providing our clients with what we call met-ocean surveys. So we measure from the seabed to the sea surface and then the atmosphere above that. So by way of real-time buoys, as you can see, my pictures of big and small buoys are everywhere in my presentation. But also using those buoys in a smart way, using them to also carry out the marine acoustic surveys that are required on sites. And the main adaptation to our buoys for that is using silent moorings, but it also helps keep costs down and de-risk equipment loss, because you're putting everything on a number of larger buoys, which we believe is a safer way to go and also creates less friction with the local communities generally. We also have a floating LiDAR partner, Ocean in France, who we work closely with. And so they bid with us in some countries and we bid with them in other countries. And our team is fully qualified to service and maintain and deploy and recover all their equipment. We provide and we sell oceanographic equipment, and we've been doing this for 20 years, which also gives us a very intimate understanding of the sensors, and we're able to troubleshoot issues as they happen. We also serve as a local service center for some of the oceanographic sensors that we represent, which tend to be kind of the research grade sensors. So having that detailed know-how in-house is also an important selling point, we believe. As I was saying, the value added work, the wave modeling and wind forecasting are products that we have been developing over the last number of years. The plot on the top left-hand side there is a hub height wind forecast that we have developed with the Danish Technical University and with the European Space Agency, using the altimeter archive on floating LiDAR databases. Next slide. Perfect. So this is CoastEye, our data portal, which can be branded to our client-specific look and feel, so that their team can use the data and access the data as if it were part of their internal intranet. CoastEye is used to manage, we use it to manage our buoy assets remotely, so we can log into all of our systems remotely and change the sampling frequencies and basically do basic housekeeping remotely. So if we have assets, I'm sat in Galway here today and it's a lovely day, but normally there'd be huge waves here. and we'd be able to access our assets in fairly harsh conditions without putting people onto boats, which is always a bonus from a health and safety point of view. COSTA is then used to visualize real-time data. Here we're looking at some ADCP data on the top right-hand side, and on the left-hand side some wave data. And we can interlink that and fuse that with satellite data. Bottom right-hand side here, I'm just showing some chlorophyll data in terms of primary production and linking it to data buoy data so you can get a real sense of confidence of the satellite overpass versus the buoy data in terms of how far apart these were taken. Our clients can also use COSTA to upload other data, so other data from other types of surveys, and also download data as a CSV file. All the data that comes through COSTA goes through various quality control procedures and can go through specific client-based ones should the client need them. Next slide, please. Perfect. So metocean buoys, I presented this in France recently, and I did a very poor translation of the larger buoys. I actually believe mostly if you're developing offshore wind assets far away at sea, you might be developing an offshore wind site that's a €3 billion project. The metocean survey doesn't quite have that value, but it's critical data that is imperative to the development of that €3 billion site. And as a result, putting a slightly bigger platform, as you can see on the images here, the larger ones are 3-meter buoys, is, I believe, a very good way to de-risk marine operations, where you can then put best-in-class sensors and even double up your sensors to de-risk fully a project in terms of the data risk. And then also just other sensors, such as the top right-hand side, there's a spectral wave sensor. Spectral wave sensors are now the size of your mobile phone, but you need a very large buoy to ensure that you're collecting the right data and that you're collecting consistent data 365 days a year, every 15 or every 20 minutes, depending on what you need for your work processes, as well as meteorological data. We've recently found out that we can also measure, put bat microphones, on the buoys over long periods of time as well. So that's something that's additional and something that's complementary to what's currently being done. Yeah. Oh, just one thing about the buoys. All the buoys have AIS, so automatic identification systems on them, so that we can track them, and so that most importantly, the local users of the marine environment can also see where these platforms are and can also make a point of avoiding them. Next slide. The equipment we put on the seabed, so these seabed frames, which measure the same data as the data from the buoys. But realistically, if you're deploying an offshore wind site, at the moment, what we are seeing is most people are looking to do bottom-mounted sensors looking up and surface sensors looking down, and then looking at the two data sets in parallel. So everyone is using a belts and brace approach to survey data collection. Waiting 12 months to get a full data set is a long time. It's a big investment. It's critical that it's done right from the outset. So using trawl-resistant mounts, and we learned a few weeks ago of equipment being trawled by fishing boats off the Atlantic coast of France. So these things do happen. They happen actually every day, but you can plan against it and you can mitigate against it using such technologies. And then also ensuring that the data you're collecting is the right data of the right quality, and that you can trace it back to exactly how it was collected. So as you can see here on the bottom image, we use a lot of lead ingots to weigh down frames, but it means that when we hold them up, they're perfectly straight. And when we sit them on the seabed, we sit them with live sensors on board, which tell us when we're on the boat the exact degree of inclination of the frame, which gives us the confidence that we can then leave it on site and deploy it, or sometimes we have to lift it back up a bit and redeploy it, just to make sure that we are getting absolutely the right data that we're looking for. We also measure other parameters in these seabed frames, such as physiochemical parameters, and more often nowadays we're looking at testing different paint types, different materials in the environment over 12 months, so that the developers of the wind farms understand erosion, understand corrosion, understand how different materials might survive the environment better than the others. So we're using these frames now as kind of frames of opportunity to test other things on. Next one, please. As I said, we work with our French partners, Acrocean, with the floating LiDARs, and these are some examples of the floating LiDAR systems. They are actually quite clever because they have their own wave energy device on board. So in wavy climates, they are able to recharge their power sources using the wave energy created by the buoy motion. And they also have a number of different power sources. So we can provide more information upon that if required. Next slide. This is just a very quick slide by way of information about the types of work that we are working on with the European Space Agency. So, as I said, collecting data for 1 or 2 years in the marine environment is extremely costly. We can now extrapolate that data over the full satellite archive, which means that all of a sudden a 2-year data set can be extrapolated into a 26 or 30-year data set of physical measurements rather than derived measurements. And it means that a project is much more bankable in terms of wind resource with a 26-year hindcast linked to it than with a 2-year hindcast. We've got a couple of white papers on this that have been published with regards to a few of the sites in the UK. So if anyone's interested in that, we can share that information after this webinar. Next slide. Oh yeah, sorry, the wind offshore assessment, that's fine, you don't have to keep back. For the wind assessment, that product can be raised up to hub height, and so it can be raised up to whatever hub height you're looking at. The other product that we've developed with the European Space Agency has been WaveWatch 3 wave model. Generally, WaveWatch 3 is assimilated, so it's kind of fine-tuned with satellite winds, but we have also assimilated ours with satellite waves. So again, a physical satellite measurement of a wave, an altimeter measurement, which makes our model quite a bit more refined than other versions of WaveWatch 3 out there. And again, all this data is fully published. We have a global, a European, and an Ireland and UK box. The very noisy picture you can see here shows all the grid points we have around Ireland, but that could be an image of Taiwan or an image of Japan. We have the global model that we can nest, so put other higher resolution models into. And from our model, we derive all the spectral data needed to basically calculate a number of different things, such as weather delay windows, but also the type of, for the early studies, prior to even doing any field work, for the very early studies in terms of early site assessment, where are you going to get the best value in terms of wave energy, where is the best place to implement a site in terms of the external environments, etc. So this is something that we are quite proud of, and that we currently, our hindcast goes to 2019 at the moment, and we currently are running that on an ongoing basis, bring it up to date. We also have the grid software, which we have developed that we can adapt to any location globally. Okay, next one. I think the next one is just showing the global version of this, running the different parameters. Yeah. So this, you can actually see there's a global run. We used a 2014 as just a point in time to show data from. But as I say, we can provide this type of data for anywhere in the world right now, which is quite a powerful tool in resource assessment. And if anyone's interested in papers on that, we can provide those as well after this. Next one. Yep, so this is my second last slide. So just to give you an idea of some clients, we've worked with Open Hydro and NG on tidal energy, with Dublin Offshore on some engineering work with ESA to do with offshore renewables, and then Codling Wind Park, which is part of EDF, and Fred Olsen. We're currently working on the ESB Clough Head Wind Park, and a number of other sites we've worked on over the years. And last slide, which is just basically just a thank you and my contact details. If you have any interest in monitoring for offshore wind sites or coastal engineering projects, we'd love to hear from you. And this is a nice picture of Dublin Bay on a sunny day, one of the few sunny days we would get in winter. Thank you for your time. Merci.
Thank you, Charlotte. We have a few questions, though. I will just transmit one for the moment because we are a little bit over time. So is TechWorks Marine able to organize complex sampling of seawater or sediment metrics?
Yes, so I specifically focused on the long-term kind of data collection, but we also do a lot of standalone surveys where we put personnel in the field to carry out seawater samples, for example, which we send to accredited laboratories, either UCAS or INAB or other accredited laboratories, depending on the country we're working in. We have also done work with automatic water samplers. So in locations where we can't access very regularly, and we can sequence or pre-program the water samplers, or we can trigger them remotely on the data buoys. That's in conditions where you really can't access very often, but those tend to be quite expensive bits of equipment. I hope that answers it.
Well, I hope so too. Anyway, we have a last session of Q&A at the end of the other presentation. Well, thank you, Charlotte. Yeah, can you...
Just one thing. So unfortunately, I have to leave. So my colleague, Philip Trickett, will be stepping in my place for the last session.
Okay.
He's our technical director, and he's well able to answer any questions.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so our next speaker is Xavier Marchand. So you joined us already on camera, Xavier. Thank you. So Xavier Marchand leads the industrial risks and environment team within the Franklin law firm. Xavier supports his clients at every stage of their industrial and technological projects, and it advises them on the prevention of risks that could affect their smooth running and claims management. So Xavier, I will let you present now. It's your turn.
Sorry. No. Sorry. So Xavier Marchand, I just want to have a spotlight maybe on the law aspect in France of the wind farm, offshore wind farm. Maybe a first focus. I cut my camera better, I think. Maybe to focus on France, it is a non-mature market now because we only have one real offshore wind farm with 27 wind turbines. Since we will have 80 wind turbines in this wind farms in the next few years, and we have 17 projects of wind farm in France, in the Channel, in the Atlantic, and the Mediterranean Sea, and we deal with France to develop in the next few years one wind farm in South Atlantic near La Rochelle, and another wind farm project in the near Marseille or near Montpellier, which is quite two wind farm. So it's a developing new energy in France, which is a lot of problem because of the reaction of people and public to this project for environmental aspect, but also for geographic or for cultural problem. In France, we are maybe we have a legislation, we have law rules, the fact that we can build some building, we can build some plant, we can build everything, but to respect with the view, with the other building, with the landslide and so on. So it's very difficult in France, and this is why we have a long delay to have authorization. On the next slide, we have, I think, yes. Yes, so to develop a wind project in France, you need maybe 5 years. The first years, the states have to announce to the public that he wants to study the fact that maybe he can have a wind farm project in France. So it's an announce, and during this announce, there is two things. First, there is some study to explore if the project is can be constructed in the offshore of France with wind, swell depth, and soil composition, and also a consultation of the government or the local representation, the local representative of France with the public authority like town and so on. So this is a 1 year project just to study if we can construct, or if we can imagine that the wind farm can be constructed in the neighborhood. After that, it is the answer is positive. You have to choose the constructor of the wind farm. We say that we have two steps. First, we have RTE, which is the state entity in France. We deal with the transportation of electricity. So we have LTE. We discuss with state and the producers to develop a project. And after they have a discussion with many producers, they launch a call of tenders, which is a special form of call of tenders, which include discussion with the producer to find the best producer. It's not, it's a long way to discuss with each producer to improve the project and so on. So at the end of the 3rd years, next slide, you have chosen the constructor, and you can begin all the consultation, the study you have to do with the people and public. So you have a special project, your special consultation procedure, which is a Fontaine consultation, which deal with public authority and RTE to fix, to determine the way you can construct or the infrastructure, sorry, of the electricity transportation in the sea and also on ground. You also have public consultation organized by the big authority in France, which is dedicated to that. And for 3 months, they launch a lot of consultation, meeting, and so on, just to give information to public, to people on the project, to discuss the project, to receive all the observation, to try to improve the project, to try to improve the impact of environmental aspect, but also on building aspect, view aspect, tourism aspect, economical aspect. So the French government really wants to have maybe not unanimity, but a large consensus. At the end of this consultation, we have on the 4th years, you have environmental and technical studies. We discuss about this with previous speakers, and you have the public inquiry, which is most specified and dedicated to the project itself. So the project is still advanced. We have the numbers of the weight of the turbines. You have the precise location of the wind farm, and you have technical files give to the public, and they discuss the file. Sorry, and after that, you can launch a construction for the 3, 4, or 5 years after that. So it's very long way. And that's why in France, because of this long way, we do not have many wind farms. So and it is the next slide. The reason why it's a long way that to these 5 years of instruction of the file, you also have to deal with a lot of environmental association, who want to dismiss the authorization and who criticize every step of the aspect. So to be sure that all the courts in France have the same opinion on that, the first things to be done by what was done by the government is to say that one court in Nantes is dealing with a wind farm, offshore wind farm, to be sure that the position they have, the way they interpret the law, was the same interpretation. So we have some examples now, and what we can see it is that the most criticized is focused on the impact of the wind farm and the study made to measure this impact. But because for the states, for the government, is too long, next year they say that all the legal aspect of that is now dedicated to the High Court in France, Conseil d'État, which deal with the administrative law, means that with authorization, permitting, and so on. So it's a Conseil d'État now, which deal with all these aspects. What are the aspects? The aspects are various. First aspect, you have to deal with the fact that you build something on the ground. So when you build something on the ground in the sea, you need to have 2 authorizations. If you are less than 12 miles, means that you are in the domain public maritime domain public, you need an authorization to be able to build something in the sea. In the economic zone, beyond the 12 miles, you need another authorization to build something. So when you have a wind farm, which is both on public domain and both on exclusive economic zone, you need to have 2 authorizations, and you need that for the company RTE, which builds the infrastructure of the transport of electricity, but also for the producer or for the constructor of the wind farm. So it means that you need 4 authorizations, 2 for RTE and 2 for the producer. So there is a law now in France in discussion in the parliament nowadays, and we will have the results at the end of December to unify this and to be sure that there is only an authorization for RTE and another authorization for the producer of the wind, or the constructor of the wind farm, and this authorization mixed the authorization for construct in the exclusive economic zone and the authorization for the public domain. Secondly, we need also specific authorization concerning or relating the environmental law. It means that to see if the impact of the construction is complied with European directive and so on about birds mainly, or also about fish and so on. So it remains a specific authorization. There is no, at the time we are speaking, there is no project to unify all this, but in other energy, like biogas and so, there is a mix of all the authorization, and we may think that in 2, 3, or 4 years, we need only one authorization for all the wind farm to be sure that all the aspect of the project is dealt with one authorization. Secondly, to be sure that it is easier for producer, developer of the project to achieve the construction of the wind farm, they also limited the way people can criticize the authorization. First, by giving to the Conseil d'État the only power to judge that, but also to limit the time of the Conseil given to the Conseil d'État to study the case. So the law now says that the Conseil d'État has 9 or 10 months to give his judgment about the authorization. So it means that the delay we have, 5 years to study, and most of the time 3, 4, 5 years to deal with case. Now we can reduce that by 1 year, and it makes easier to every project to have a capacity to see a real schedule planning on that. I think I have presented the most important things on that, and maybe if you have questions, it's better than to just read a PowerPoint. Do you have any questions?
Okay, so that was the end of your presentation, Xavier?
Yes, mainly because I think we dismiss, we send the presentation, and you have the details, and it's maybe too technical to be. I think it's boring, and maybe question is better, I think.
Well, so far no questions concerning your presentation, Xavier. Okay, well, thank you for this dense presentation on the latest updates on law compliance, legal compliance. We still have a few questions that were not answered concerning the previous presentations, especially the one from TechWorks Marine. So yeah, since Charlotte is not there anymore, Philip is supposed to be able to answer these questions. Maybe I will wait for him to be present. Well, I have 2 general questions anyway that some maybe Kathy you can answer. I don't know. Let's see if that works. Are the UK targets for offshore wind farms now that the UK is separated from EU are different from the UK than from the EU. For example, we have a 50 gigawatts target for the UK by 2030, and other targets by 2050. And for Europe, we have 300 gigawatts by 2050. So targets are different.
We're still planning to develop along the same lines as prior to Brexit. That has been confirmed. You know, in certainly Boris Johnson's net zero plans, and things have been somewhat unusual since then with the change in prime ministers. But as far as I'm aware, there hasn't been any move away from that. People appreciate with energy security, especially with the war in Ukraine, then we still need to be very committed to developing our renewables as well as our more traditional fuel options. I think the cost of providing grid connections continues to be a major strain for the industry, and certainly in Scotland there has been some suggestion that there would be a slight reduction in the amount of money available for providing grid connections. But when you look at the number of projects planned in Scotland, I'm hoping that's nothing alarming. I remember being at conferences 20 years ago when people said that the offshore wind farms will be ready before the grid connections. And in that 20 years, there's obviously been a lot of work, both from offshore wind, but also from the grid connection companies to make sure that the offshore developers are able to get their product, in other words, the electricity, to market and to the people who need it. I've added some more details on some of the French proposed project areas to one of my slides. So when we send out the slide pack, that'll be on there. And I've also detailed the proposals for France specifically.
Okay.
So if anyone is particularly interested in that, France currently has 2 megawatts of operating offshore wind capacity and 5.4 gigawatts capacity, either under construction or for which tendering is ongoing.
That's the map that Xavier showed at some point around the coast of France. Yeah.
Yes, France has 4 demonstrator floating farms under development, 3 of which are scheduled to come online in the Mediterranean by 2024. And the French government aims to allocate around 2 gigawatts of offshore wind capacity per year from 2025 to reach 20 gigawatts of auctioned off capacity by 2030, and 18 gigawatts of operational capacity by 2035, and 40 gigawatts by 2040. If that's any help.
Thank you, Kathy. I will go back to TechWorks. Philip, so you are with us?
Hi.
Okay, I can hear you. No problem. We have a question concerning bias. I don't know if I pronounce it well. Boys,
yes.
Boys, okay. How long does your Boys system resist on field before requiring maintenance and or replacement?
Okay, it really depends on the environment. In sort of like sort of British Isles point of view, sort of like around the coast of Ireland and the UK, in the summer periods, we try and either have a 3-month service period, depending on the equipment, or 6 weeks. So if it's a lot of optical equipment, from a point of view of actually looking at turbidity or chlorophyll or something like that, it needs the 6 weeks servicing. If it's ADCPs and CTDs for sort of salinity and temperature, then that can be serviced every 3 months. And the service plan also depends on how far offshore the actual systems are as well.
I hope that answers the question. Sorry, my microphone was off. Okay. We also have a more general question about wave energy. I don't know who can answer that. Do you expect wave energy will become a key part of offshore renewables, since right now it seems like only offshore wind is being developed?
Yeah, I can start on this one if you like. So we have seen, I've been involved with wave and tidal energy projects again for, well, since probably about 2015, and RSK have been and are at the moment working with various developers in this area, including there's a wave energy demonstration site off County Mayo on the west coast of Ireland. Now, interestingly, there hasn't been any deployment of wave energy devices at the site since it achieved consent in 2015. But I understand they are in talks with wave energy demonstration clients. So that's very encouraging. And obviously it's a very difficult and very hostile environment to develop some of these bits of equipment, and some of them have failed because they've had too many working parts to maintain. It's just been very difficult to be successful. And we saw earlier, 10 years or so ago, companies like Pelamis struggling and unfortunately, having to close up shop. So, but it's definitely not all over, and there's lots of opportunities for both wave and tidal energy going forward, and it's certainly of interest all around the UK and wider Europe. So yeah, it's still a very exciting possibilities and potential there. Wales is another area of the UK where wave energy is certainly being looked at very seriously.
Okay.
Could I add to that?
Yes, sure.
So we worked with the sort of like first wave of Irish wave developers, basically mainly on the west coast of Ireland, Galway Bay, and up in just off Belmullet. I think basically what's happened is wave is there, but it's the focus has changed on the type of device. A lot of the only device that I can think of that's still going in its pretty much original form is an oscillating air column one, which is a buoy that's moored. The rest of the devices are all sort of more geared to slightly more passive wave collection. Apart from, I remember seeing a Portuguese device which is installed on quays and jetties to make the most of the wave actions on those. But no, I think there's a bit more of an uptake of wave devices now that offshore wind is starting to get going. And it definitely, I think, it plays a big role later on in the sort of offshore power generation, just due to the fact that it's one of those things which will complement offshore wind quite nicely.
Okay, well, that answers the question. Thank you, Philip. We have one question for you, Xavier. Bon, en français. A priori, Esme, you can translate if we speak slowly.
Yes.
Donc la question en français concerne le fait qu'en effet, Xavier, sur le diagramme, un peu le calendrier que vous avez présenté concernant la procédure pour le développement d'un projet éolien offshore, les études environnementales apparaissent à N+4, alors qu'on n'a pas la garantie que le projet puisse passer. Et donc, voilà, après 4 ans à bosser sur un projet, je reprends la question texto, hein, ça pourrait faire capoter le projet malgré tous les investissements fournis les 4 premières années?
I'll just quickly translate the question.
Yes.
Basically, the question is, based on what Xavier showed us, the timelines of a project, the person here is quite surprised to see that the environmental study only appears 4 years down the line, and is wondering why so late, because it could obviously stop a project.
Ainsi, je l'ai précisé, la frise que je vous ai donnée, c'est une frise, enfin, un calendrier, qui est le calendrier de ce qui se passe réellement.
So that's the calendar that Xavier showed is what happens in real life.
Donc, ça veut dire qu'effectivement, dans la séquence des autorisations qui en principe et des études d'impact qui devraient être très organisées, il y a des problèmes.
Basically, it means that in the sequencing of operations, of authorizations, we actually have an issue.
Et ce problème, c'est celui que j'évoque, qui est de deux ordres et qui sont liés. Le premier, c'est une sorte de méfiance des citoyens français, des Français et des autorités publiques pour les éoliennes.
So the problem is twofold. So the first point is a distrust from the public and the authorities to wind farm projects.
Et le deuxième, c'est la volonté des autorités publiques de faire en sorte qu'il y ait, on va dire, de la concertation pour que le projet finisse par être admis.
And the second point is that the French authorities have a wish of consultation with the public and the local authorities in order to have the projects go forward with as little resistance as possible.
Yes. Et si possible, pour éviter qu'il y ait des recours devant les tribunaux qui viennent contester les autorisations.
So this is to avoid legal recall, bringing basically people going legal to stop projects.
Donc c'est pour ça que dans les études pendant les 3-4 années, ce qui se passe, c'est que dès que dans les différentes consultations, des problèmes sont soulevés de traitement esthétique, par exemple, ou de problèmes liés au son et autres, en fait, l'État français va demander souvent aux développeurs de mener de nouvelles études pour essayer de voir si on peut réduire l'impact ou faire autrement.
So basically, the 4 years is really so that at every step, the French government can come back and ask for more studies in order to reduce the impact as much as possible of the project.
Et donc, c'est pour ça que, et vous verrez dans la présentation, le texte actuellement en cours de discussion vise en fait à réduire les possibilités de contestation dans le temps, puisqu'on va limiter les recours, et puis également sur les principes, puisqu'aujourd'hui, et c'est là que j'ai oublié de le préciser, aujourd'hui la loi va venir préciser, notamment pour les études d'impact, qu'un projet éolien est un projet d'intérêt général qui permet de porter atteinte aux espèces protégées notamment.
So, sorry, I might have to re-ask. Basically, the current law says that a wind farm project is a project of general interest which can have an impact on the environment, which a certain amount of impact is accepted. And on the other hand, they are currently working on a new law or an update of that law to try and reduce the number of consultations steps so that to make the projects go a bit more smoothly. Was that correct? Did I translate?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Et on doit avoir, le résultat sera connu, tout ça est en discussion actuellement, mais on devrait avoir le nouveau pack légal, on va dire, pour la fin du mois de décembre.
So end of December, we should have the new law should be published.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see how different European countries go through the development process. So most countries, governments will do some upfront work. So there'll be plan level habitat risk assessments for the offshore industry in some countries. I know in the Netherlands, the government does the environmental impact assessments up front. So there's different approaches depending on which European country you're in.
Yeah. I have one last question, toujours en lien avec la réglementation. Donc, la durée des procédures semble incompatible avec le calendrier de la mise en service des parcs posés. Pensez-vous que ces décalages vont nuire à la qualité des études d'impact? Alors, ouais, ça c'est une question technique. C'est pas forcément que de la réglementation.
So I will say the question in English. The length, the time scales for these procedures seem to not be compatible with the calendar of bringing to service the different wind farms. And do we think that these décalages, these setbacks will have an impact on the quality of the impact assessments?
Shall I start this one?
Yeah.
So the timescales for project development are always tight, and the developers always press to get them carried out as quickly as possible. Obviously, you have to go through all due process, and usually the environmental regulators will ask for 2 years of bird and marine mammal survey data. So that should be the starting position, that it's always going to take at least 2 years to gather data. Of the new offshore wind farms being planned in the UK now, they are hoping to be constructed by 2030, and it has taken longer than that up till now, especially some of the projects that had significant bird issues to address, where the bird regulators, certainly in Scotland, brought those in to be examined, which added another 2 years onto the timescale. There have been a lot of lessons learned, especially in cumulative impact assessment and the habitat regulations with compensation, and also issues to do with overriding public interest. So all of that will continue to develop as we see the industry advance.
Okay, thank you, Kathy. I hope that answers the question. We are finishing anyway our presentation, our webinar. Thank you for our speakers. Thank you, Xavier. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Philip, while Charlotte is not here. Just as a reminder, we will send you shortly after the webinar a small survey so you can complete, so we can improve our process on webinars. Well, thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great to meet you.
Bye.